cookie was already on the table when my husband leaned over and said, "I need you to pull up your brother's LinkedIn before we sit down." I almost laughed. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. My husband works in forensic accounting. He doesn't make jokes about professional records. And he had that look. The one I've learned over 4 years of marriage means he already knows something and is waiting to see if I'll get there on my own. I set down the gravy boat and looked at him. "What did you find?" "Just pull it up," he said quietly. "Before your dad makes the toast." My brother had flown in from Portland 2 days earlier. He'd walked through my parents' front door in a blazer and dress shoes, carrying a bottle of Bordeaux and talking about his new office in the Pearl District, the promotion he'd just gotten, the conference in Amsterdam he was flying to in January. My mother had cried. My father had gripped his shoulder for a long time without saying anything. My brother is the oldest. He was always the one they talked about at church, at the grocery store, at every family gathering where someone inevitably asked how the kids were doing. He had a master's degree in finance from Georgetown. He ran the Pacific Northwest division of a mid-size investment firm. He made more money in a year than our parents had made in a decade. That was the story. That had always been the story. I stood in my kitchen with my phone in my hand and pulled up LinkedIn. The page loaded slowly. I found my brother's profile. I scrolled down to his education section. Georgetown University. Master of Science, Financial Management. Graduated 2009. I lowered my phone. "It's there," I said. Georgetown 2009. Same as always. My husband looked at the screen for a second, then back at me. "Call the registrar on Monday," he said. "Just call and ask them to confirm the degree." Then he picked up the gravy boat I'd set down and walked it to the dining room. I didn't sleep well that night. My husband didn't explain further. He rarely does, not when he's still working something out. I know his process well enough to know that pushing him when he's like that gets me nowhere. He answers questions when he's ready and not a moment before. What I kept coming back to, lying in the dark while he slept beside me, was the conference in Amsterdam. My brother had mentioned it over dessert. Casual. Like it was nothing. A fintech summit, he'd said, where his firm was sending 3 regional directors to represent their investment strategy to European partners. And I had smiled and said that sounded impressive. And my mother had refilled his coffee without being asked. And my father had nodded in that slow, proud way he has, like he's storing the moment somewhere safe. I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember when my brother had first mentioned Georgetown. It was so long ago that it felt like it had always been true. Like a fact about the world, not a thing he'd said once, and we'd all accepted without checking. By the time the room started getting light, I'd made a decision. I would call Georgetown on Monday, and I would not tell my brother. Monday came. I waited until I was on my lunch break, sitting in my car in the parking garage outside the nonprofit where I work in grant development. I had the number pulled up. I had my brother's full name typed into my notes app so I wouldn't stumble over it. The registrar's office answered on the 3rd ring. I explained that I was trying to verify a degree for a family matter, which was true enough, and gave them his name and the graduation year listed on his profile. There was a pause. Some clicking. Then the woman on the line said, "I'm sorry, I'm not finding anyone by that name in our graduate records for that program or that year." I said, "Can you check again? He may have gone by a nickname." She checked again. She tried 2 variations of his name. She tried 1 year earlier and 1 year later. Nothing. I thanked her and sat in my car for 22 minutes without moving. The drive home felt different than usual. Like the air inside the car was slightly the wrong temperature. I kept replaying things, not big things, but small ones. The way my brother had never mentioned a single professor by name in all the years since graduating. The way he deflected when my cousin, who also went to Georgetown for law school, had tried to talk about the campus. "It's been so long," my brother had said, laughing. I barely remember where anything was. I had thought that was normal. People forget. Now, I was rethinking a lot of things. My husband was home before me that evening, which doesn't happen often. He was at the kitchen counter going through mail when I walked in, and he looked up and read my face immediately. "You called," he said. He's not in their records. My husband nodded slowly. He set down the mail. Okay. Okay, I said. That's it? How long have you suspected this? A few months, he said. I didn't want to say anything until I was more sure. What made you suspicious? He came around the counter and pulled out a bar stool and sat down, which is what he does when he's about to say something that requires stillness. His firm filed a disclosure with the SEC last spring, he said. I came across it through a client matter. Standard stuff, listed their regional directors, educational backgrounds, credentials. Your brother's entry cited the Georgetown degree. I looked it up out of habit. The program he listed wasn't offered in the format he described in the year he graduated. The timeline didn't work. And you said nothing for months. I said something at Thanksgiving. He was right. That was what the whisper had been. I didn't call my brother that night. I needed another day. I needed to figure out what I actually believed before I said a word. Because here is the complicated part, the part that doesn't fit neatly into a story about lies and consequences. My brother is good at his job. Whatever he told his firm to get hired, he had built a real career on top of it. He was responsible for a team of 11 people. His clients trusted him. His colleagues respected him. I had watched him work a room full of strangers at our cousin's rehearsal dinner, and I had genuinely been impressed. None of that made the lie okay, but it made it harder to hold in my head as simple. My husband, when I said this out loud, didn't dismiss it. I know, he said. It doesn't make it simpler. It makes it harder. What do I do? That's not really my question to answer, he said. He's your brother. I called my brother on Wednesday evening. I told him I wanted to catch up, that we hadn't talked just the two of us in a while, which was true. He sounded pleased. Easy. He talked for a while about the Amsterdam trip, which had apparently been moved to March, and about a new restaurant in his neighborhood that he thought I'd like. I let him talk. And then, when there was a natural pause, I said, I called Georgetown last week. The silence that followed was about 3 seconds long. 3 seconds doesn't sound like much, but I've played it back in my mind 100 times since then, and I think I knew in that silence everything I needed to know. What? He said. I called the registrar's office. They don't have you in their records. Another silence. Shorter this time. There could be an administrative error, he said. Those record systems are old, they lose things. I gave them your name, the program, and 3 different graduation years, I said. Nothing. He didn't say anything. I'm not calling to report you, I said. I'm calling because you're my brother, and I need to understand what actually happened. What actually happened took him a while to say. He had enrolled at Georgetown. That part was true. He had started the master's program in the fall of 2007 with every intention of finishing it. But his second semester, something went wrong, a combination of things, he said. Financial pressure. A relationship that had fallen apart badly. A kind of paralysis that he didn't have a clean name for, except that he'd stopped going to classes and hadn't told anyone. And by the time he surfaced, he was too far behind to recover the semester. He withdrew quietly. He told our parents he was taking a leave of absence. He moved back to our hometown for about 6 months. He worked at a hardware store. He tried to figure out what to do next. And then a former classmate reached out about a junior analyst position at a small investment firm in Seattle, entry level, the kind of job that in those years, 2009, right at the edge of the recession, people were grateful to have. He had applied. On the application, where it asked for educational background, he had written Georgetown, MS, Financial Management. He had been hired. I thought I'd fix it, he told me. I thought I'd finish the degree at night, online, something. I thought it would be temporary. That was 16 years ago, I said. I know, he said. I know, he said. I know. I want to be honest about what I felt in that conversation, because it wasn't one clean emotion. I was angry, genuinely, deeply angry in a way that had weight and heat to it, not just at the lie, but at all the years we'd all repeated it back to him like a chorus. All the times our mother had told people about Georgetown with such pride in her voice. All the times I had felt a low-grade pressure at family gatherings, like I was supposed to be doing more, achieving more, because look at what my brother had built. Some of that pressure had been built on a foundation he'd invented. I was angry about that, but underneath the anger was something sadder, and I think truer. I kept thinking about the 23-year-old version of my brother sitting alone in his apartment in Georgetown, too ashamed to tell anyone he was drowning. I kept thinking about him going home and stocking shelves at a hardware store and saying nothing. I kept thinking about how long he'd been carrying a secret that had probably never felt lighter, no matter how much time passed. That didn't make what he did acceptable, but it made it human. "What do you want to do?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. And then very quietly, "I've thought about this for years. I just never let myself actually think about it." "That's not the same thing," I said. "No," he said. "It's not." I told my husband that night. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What does he want to do about his firm?" "I don't know. We didn't get that far." "He'll need to get there," my husband said. Not unkindly, just clearly. "It's in an SEC filing. That's not something that stays buried." I hadn't thought about the SEC disclosure. I sat with that for a minute. "If someone else finds it before he addresses it," my husband said, "it goes from a professional error to a regulatory issue. There's a difference in how those resolve. You're saying he needs to get ahead of it. I'm saying he has more control right now than he might have later." I called my brother again the next morning. I told him what my husband had said. I told him about the SEC filing. He hadn't known it was there, or hadn't let himself look. He was quiet for a long time. "I could lose my job," he said finally. "Maybe," I said, "but you might also keep it. You've built a real track record. That's not nothing. And people respond differently to someone who comes forward than to someone who gets caught. Who else knows? Just us. My husband found it, but he's not going to say anything. That's not his call to make." "Mom and Dad?" "Not from me. Not unless you want them to." Another silence. Longer this time. "I need a few days," he said. "Okay," I said. "Take them, but don't take too many." He called me 8 days later. He had talked to a lawyer first, which I was glad about. The lawyer had helped him draft a disclosure to his firm, honest, professional, framed around correcting a long-standing error in his employment record. He had also quietly enrolled in a finishing program, an accelerated credentialing course in financial analysis that would give him a legitimate certification within 6 months. His firm had not fired him. They had placed him on a 30-day administrative review, which his lawyer had helped him understand and navigate. At the end of that period, they had offered him a choice. He could stay in his current role at a reduced level while the credential was being completed, or he could transition to a senior advisor role that didn't carry the same regulatory disclosure requirements. He was staying at the reduced level for now. He thought that was right. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Not really," he said, "but I think I will be." He paused. I could hear him breathing. "I told Mom and Dad," he said. "I hadn't expected that." "How did expected that?" "How did that go?" "Worse than I thought," he said, "and then better than I deserved." I knew exactly what he meant. I'd seen our father at a loss for words maybe 3 times in my life. I'd seen our mother angry in that very still, very quiet way that is harder to weather than yelling. I imagined the scene and felt the echo of it in my chest. "They're going to be okay," I said. "I know," he said. "I just didn't realize how much I needed to hear them say it." Thanksgiving came again 11 months later. My brother didn't bring Bordeaux this time. He brought a pie he'd made himself, pecan. Slightly lopsided, not quite set in the middle. He set it on the counter and shrugged and said the crust had given him trouble. My mother looked at it for a second and then said, "It'll be fine," and put her arm around him briefly in that efficient, unsentimental way she has that somehow communicates more warmth than a longer embrace would. My father didn't make a toast. He just said grace the way he always does. thanking God for the food and for everyone around the table, and he left it at that. We talked about ordinary things, the cold front moving in, a movie someone had seen, the lopsided pecan pie, which tasted better than it looked. My husband caught my eye across the table at one point and gave me a small, quiet look. Nothing dramatic, just acknowledgement. I looked back at my brother. He was telling my nephew about something, a hiking trail he'd done in the Columbia River Gorge, some waterfall he thought the kid would like. He was chartering with his fork, animated, fully present in the way that people sometimes are when they've put something down that they've been carrying for a long time without realizing how heavy it was. I thought about the hardware store, the apartment in Georgetown, the 6 months of silence that had turned into 16 years of carefully maintained fiction. I thought about how we tell stories about our families, and how those stories become true just by being repeated. How we give people the narrative we think they need and then watch them live inside it, and sometimes we are so busy handing them the story that we forget to check whether it fits. My brother looked up and caught me watching him. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. We just went back to our food, and outside the window, the first real snow of the season was starting to come down, slow and even, covering everything it touched. I've thought a lot about that 3-second silence. The one on the phone after I said I called Georgetown. 3 seconds is nothing. 3 seconds is effing. What struck me most, looking back, wasn't that my brother lied. It was how long the lie had been allowed to live simply because no one bought to question it. We loved him. We were proud of him. And somewhere along the way, those two things became a reason to stop looking closely. Love, when it becomes a substitute for honesty, stops being fully love. It becomes something softer and more dangerous, a kind of protection that ends up protecting the wrong thing. My husband saw it because he looks at numbers for a living. He is trained to notice when something doesn't add up, to follow the thread even when it leads somewhere uncomfortable. That's a form of integrity that I think we undervalue. The willingness to keep your eyes open when closing them would be so much easier. He could have said nothing. It wasn't his family. It wasn't his problem. But he understood that letting a quiet error stay quiet is its own kind of choice, and he made a different one. My brother had intelligence. That was never the question. He had built a real career, earned real trust, managed real people, all on a foundation he had invented at 23 because he was ashamed and scared and didn't know what else to do. The saddest part of his story isn't the lie. It's that he was capable of doing the work honestly all along. He just didn't believe that at the time, and so he spent 16 years carrying the weight of something he never actually needed to carry. What changed things wasn't exposure. It was the decision to stop running. My brother could have deflected, lawyered up in the defensive sense, hoped the SEC filing stayed buried. Instead, he talked to someone, made a plan, walked into his firm, and said the thing he'd been terrified to say for nearly 2 decades. That took something I can only describe as courage of the quiet kind. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a person deciding that the version of himself built on fear was finally less bearable than the version built on truth. I think about the hardware store a lot. The 6 months he spent stocking shelves and saying nothing. I used to imagine that period as a low point. Now I think of it differently, as the moment before someone decides who they're actually going to be. He made the wrong choice then. He made the right one later. That's not a redemption story in the tidy sense. It's just a human one. What I took from all of it is something I'm still learning to apply to my own life. The stories we tell about the people we love become the stories they feel they have to live up to. My family handed my brother a version of himself that had no room in it for failure or doubt or the ordinary mess of being young and overwhelmed. And he accepted that story, and then he maintained it. And it cost him more than any of us knew. The snow was coming down outside the window that second Thanksgiving. The pie was lopsided. Nobody made a speech. It was the most honest meal we'd had in years.